What's going on, guys? My name is Matt and I am back with a new PC build. This time the price point is $800, and for that price you're getting a lot of performance for the money. This video, like my last few new parts builds, is going to be a full build guide. I'm not only going to be showing you each of the parts and explaining why I picked them, but I'm also going to be showing you how to put everything together step by step and show you how this system performs in a bunch of games and in streaming. This video is in partnership with Micro Center, who is the one-stop shop for all of your work and learn from home tech needs. They offer by far the best in-person experience for buying PC parts, and while I did go off of pricing from Amazon and Newegg, buying these parts in store at Micro Center could save you a good amount of money through combo deals and other discounts. They also now offer a custom PC builder, which helps you spec and budget out your system using parts that they have in stock and ready to be purchased. Check the links in the description to find a Micro Center near you and to check out the new PC builder. Like I said before, this is a system that comes out to right around $800, and at the time of making this video all the parts are in stock, but due to constantly fluctuating supply of PC parts, I'll leave links to alternative ones in the description in case something goes out of stock. This system's perfect for someone looking to get into PC gaming, and even is powerful enough to do some video editing and streaming to sites like Twitch or YouTube. Something also interesting about this build is it's the first new Intel based system I've built in a long time. Intel is finally offering some decent value for the money CPUs again, and I decided to switch things up a bit as all of my other build guides have featured AMD CPUs. Now obviously there are tons of different ways you could have spent this budget, but I went with parts that offer a good value for the money, are reliable, and will last you years to come. This system's also very upgradable, which will be helpful later down the line when you want to add a little extra performance without changing a whole bunch of stuff in your system. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into talking about each of the parts and explanations as to why I picked them. I'm going to start things off with the CPU. Again, believe it or not, this is an Intel based system. What I went with is the Intel Core i5-10400, which comes in at around $180 depending on where you look. This is a 6-core CPU with hyper-threading, which makes it great for not just gaming, but also for heavily multi-threaded applications. This CPU can turbo all the way up to 4.3 GHz and is a great option for mid-range systems. This chip is locked, so there isn't the ability to overclock, but stock performance is still very respectable. Another nice feature is this CPU also features integrated graphics, which can be very helpful for troubleshooting a system or for running your system without a graphics card. Overall, this is a very good jack of all trades CPUs that should last a very long time. One other nice thing about this i5 is the fact it comes with a free included cooler inside of the box. It's just the basic Intel stock cooler, so it's far from fancy, but it gets the job done. This is basically just a hunk of aluminum with a fan attached, but it's free and does a decent job of keeping the CPU cool and staying quiet. Temps were acceptable, and you'll be able to get real world examples of how hot it's running during the benchmarks, which is later in the video. With all this being said, if you have $20 extra to spend, then upgrading to a basic tower cooler might not be a bad idea. This will not only look better, but it will allow the CPU to run a bit cooler and allow the fan to spin slower, which will keep the system quieter. For the motherboard the CPU is going into, I went with an option that seemed like it would be a good value for the money while still having all the features we need. This is the Gigabyte B460M DS3H, coming in at around $80. This is one of the more inexpensive B460 boards you can get, but it still has a lot of nice features like 4 DIMM slots, an M.2 slot, and a decent back panel I/O. This is a micro ATX board, so it doesn't fill up the entire motherboard space in our ATX mid-tower case, but it still looks great and is a good pairing with the CPU I went with. VRMs on this guy aren't great, but that's fine because this is meant to be paired with locked CPUs like our i5, and it offers the option to upgrade to something like a locked i7 or i9 in the future. Overall, this board works well in this system, and I have no regrets recommending it for a build using a non-overclockable Intel CPU. Moving on to RAM, this is a place where not a crazy amount of attention need to be paid. Unlike Ryzen, Intel CPUs aren't affected as much by RAM speed, so going for a super fast kit wasn't necessary. With that being said, going with a 2-stick dual channel kit with a good amount of capacity was important. What I went with is this Team Group 2x8GB kit of their Vulkan Z DDR4 memory. This memory is clocked at 3200 MHz, which is a good speed, especially when you consider this kit comes in at right around $65. 16 gigabytes is plenty for modern AAA gaming and is a good amount for streaming and even video editing. With that being said, if you're wanting to do a lot of editing with this system, then going with 32 gigabytes of RAM might not be a bad idea, especially because of how cheap DDR4 RAM is right now. Overall, this is a good kit of RAM, and I have actually used this exact same kit in a few different builds and have never had a problem with it. Moving on to storage, what I went with is a single 500GB SSD. This is a Crucial MX500, which is a very highly regarded SATA SSD that's perfect for an OS drive. This drive does have DRAM, which is why it's a good fit for an OS drive. 500GB is plenty for your OS, applications, and a number of games. With that being said, modern games are getting bigger and bigger as time goes on, and if you're planning to play something like Modern Warfare, then adding a 2TB mechanical drive for $50 wouldn't be a bad idea, whether you add that right when you build it or later down the line when you've saved up more money and need more space for games. Some of you may question why I didn't go for a faster NVMe drive, and really the reason is because this drive is currently the best value for the money, and if all you're doing is gaming, then you won't notice any difference between a SATA and NVMe SSD, especially with a quality SATA drive like the MX500. Next, let's talk about the graphics card. Right now there are a ton of different options to go with, and I went with one that I felt offered the best price to performance and that fit into our budget. What I went with is the AMD Radeon RX 5600 XT. This is the Red Dragon version from PowerColor and is honestly one of my favorite 5600 XT variants. It's one of my favorites because it comes in as one of the more affordable 5600 XTs at $280 and has a very minimal design that I love. Obviously, looks are subjective, but I think the all-black design with the metal backplate look really nice. This card has 6GB of video memory and is a great card for both 1080p and 1440p gaming. Temps were pretty good, and again, for more details on that, stick around for the benchmarks. Overall, this card is great, is an awesome pairing with the i5-10400, and I have no problems recommending it. Next up is the power supply. I went with the 650-watt PowerSpec model, which is Micro Center's in-house brand, but if you don't have a Micro Center near you to get one of these, then I'll leave links to alternative ones you can get from Amazon or Newegg. Power supply stock is very sporadic right now, so make sure to check all the links to find one that's in stock at a good price. 650 watts is way more than enough, and 550 watts would also suffice. This is a semi-modular power supply, so I only had to use the cables that I needed and left a few off to the side, which helped to save on cable clutter. With this being said, the power supply basement on our case is huge, so even a non-modular unit would work fine. This power supply offers plenty of clean power to the entire system, and my only gripe is the ketchup and mustard cables on the 24-pin motherboard and 8-pin CPU cable. Other than that, this worked great for this system. Finally, let's talk about the case. I went with the Metallic Gear Neo Air, which is a $60 case that offers a lot of features for the money. This guy has a tempered glass side panel, a big power supply basement, and a full mesh front panel. Not only this, but it also comes included with 2 RGB fans, which can be controlled with software on our system or directly from the case. This case was super easy to build in, and I think this is a great case for first-time PC builders. Just like power supplies, cases are also being very sporadic inventory-wise, which makes this case a good choice because of the platform it builds on. This case, the Metallic Gear Neo Silent, and the Phanteks P350X all share the same exact internal frame, meaning any of them will work fine for this build and allow you to follow along exactly with the guide portion of this video. So if one of those other ones looks better to you and is in stock, then go ahead and get it. For $60 plus shipping, this case offers an insane amount of value for the money, and I've also built in the Neo Silent, which also is great. Overall, for $800, you're getting a well-balanced set of parts that make up a system that should last you for years to come. The performance is great, which you'll see in the gaming and streaming benchmarks, and this is a great system for a first-time builder because I'm going to show you how to put everything together step by step in 1 minute. And don't worry, getting any of the alternate parts linked in the description will not change the building process at all, and you can still follow this guide. So now that you've seen each of the parts and understand why I picked them, it's now time to show you how to put everything together step by step, and even show you all the drivers you need so you'll know everything will be set up correctly and that you'll be able to get the most performance possible out of your system. There are a number of ways ways and orders to build this system, but I'll go over my preferred method. Before you get building, it's important to make sure you're ready by gathering the right tools and have an open area to work on. The only thing you'll really need is a standard Phillips head screwdriver and a small pair of pliers. I would highly recommend you use a magnetic screwdriver. This will make building the PC a little bit easier and can be helpful in a number of ways. Next, let's talk about static. I personally don't worry about it and have never had any issues or problems with it. If you live in a very dry place or are worried about it, you can use an anti-static ground strap like this one, or periodically ground yourself on something like a light switch screw. With your workspace ready to go, your schedule clear, and your tools in hand, it is now time to start building your PC. Start by getting out your motherboard box, open it up and grab out the SATA cables, the board itself, the I/O shield, and the manual. Take the motherboard out of the bag and rest it on top of the box it came in. Grab the CPU clamshell and open it up so it's ready to go. Bringing your attention to the CPU socket on the motherboard, push down and out on the metal lever, then lift it up to reveal the socket. Pick up your CPU, handling it only by the edges, and line the marked corner on the CPU with the marked corner on the motherboard and lower it into place. You can also line up the notches in both the CPU and the CPU socket. Once in, you can lower the socket back down and push the retention arm back down and under the clip. Doing this will also make the socket cover pop off. Make sure to save this cover in case you need to RMA the motherboard or transport it without the CPU in the future. Now go ahead and grab the cooler that came with the CPU box. Flipping it upside down, you can see it comes with thermal paste pre-applied, so there's no reason to add our own. Lower it down with the Intel logo facing up and lining up the pegs on the cooler with the holes in the motherboard. Now press each of the pegs down until they snap into place. Next, take the CPU fan cable and bring it to the CPU fan header. Line the notch in the connector and header up and plug it into place. Now it's time to install our RAM. Open up both tabs on slots 2 and 4, which are the gray ones. Now take your first RAM stick and line the notch on the stick with the notch in the slot and lower it into place. Once in, press down on each end until the two clips snap shut. Repeat the same process for the second stick in slot 4. With that done, put your motherboard to the side and get out your case. Take it out of the box and begin by removing the 2 thumb screws for the back panel, then pull out and lift it away. Next, unscrew the 2 screws from the front glass panel, pull back and lift it away. Go ahead and put the foam, the plastic bag, and both panels into the box. This protects the panels and gets them out of the way while you're building. You can now grab onto the bottom of the front panel and pull away from the case to pop it off. Pull out the drive cage containing this brown box with all the screws necessary to assemble the system. Pull all the cables to the back, then set the case onto its side. Grab the I/O shield we took out of the motherboard box earlier and line it up like this with the back I/O cutout. Pop each corner into place until the I/O shield is secure. It should look like this when installed. Before the motherboard is installed, you need to remove 2 of these 3 standoffs to relocate them. Once out, install one here and one here. This can be done with a nut driver or a pair of pliers. Now take your motherboard and lower it into place, lining up the I/O with the I/O shield and making sure you can see the standoffs through the motherboard holes. Now take 6 motherboard screws that look like this and install one in each of the holes that has a corresponding standoff below it. These are here, 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 and here. Now take out your power supply and the extra cables. Plug the red 8-pin cable into the red header on the back of the power supply. Now take one of these cables and plug the 6-pin end into any of the 3 open headers. Now take your power supply with the fan facing down and push it to the back of the case like this. Take the 4 screws that came included with the power supply and screw one into each of the holes that match up with the case and power supply. Now we can begin routing cables. Take the 24-pin that looks like this and route it through this hole here. Take the USB 3 cable and route it through the same hole. Take the PCIe cable that looks like this and push it through this hole in the PSU basement. Next, take the front panel connectors that look like this and put them through this hole here. Next, take one of the fan cables and route it through here. Finally, bring your attention to the top right of the case, route the 8-pin CPU cable up through here, and the other fan cable up through here. Now you can set the case on its side to begin plugging things in. Let's start with the fan cables. One plugs in next to the 8-pin CPU header at the top of the motherboard near the I/O, and the other plugs in right next to the 24-pin header to the right of the RAM sticks. These plug in exactly like the CPU fan cable did. Now for the 24-pin cable, line the notch in the connector with the notch in the header and press it into place. For the 8-pin CPU power cable, line up the notch in the header with the notch in the connector and press it into place. Now take the blue USB 3 cable which plugs in below the 24-pin and the SATA headers, line the notch in the connector with the notch in the header and press it into place. Next, take the HD audio cable which plugs in at the bottom left of the motherboard by these golden capacitors and plug it in with the HD audio text facing up. Now for the front panel connectors, bring your attention to the bottom right of the motherboard, take the power switch connector and plug it into these two pins. Orientation doesn't matter. Next, take the reset connector and plug it in directly below the power switch. Again, orientation doesn't matter. Finally, take one of the SATA cables that we took out of the motherboard box earlier and plug one end into one of the SATA headers and push the other end to the back of the case. Now it's time to install our graphics card. At the back of the case, remove these two thumb screws and pull away the two corresponding covers. Next, push open the PCIe lock that looks like this. Grab your graphics card and line the notch in the card with the notch in the PCIe slot and lower it into place. Once you're sure it's down correctly, press down until the card is fully seated and the PCIe lock clips shut. Now take the PCIe power cable, line up the two notches and press it into place. You can now reinstall one or both of the thumb screws we took out earlier. Now with the case back on its feet, pull out one of the hard drive caddies. Take your SSD like this and install 4 of these screws into it like this, making sure the connector end is pointing towards the pull tabs. Now you can slide the caddy back into place. Route the SATA power and data cables through this hole here and plug them one at a time into the back of the SSD. Now you can plug the SATA power connector from the case lighting into the other SATA power port on the power supply cable. We won't be plugging this LED cable into the motherboard because the case's built-in controller works better than Gigabyte software. With this done, you can cable manage the system by pulling the excess cable length for each cable into the back of the case and secure things down with some of the included cable ties. Not much cable management is needed, and I spent less than 5 minutes doing this. Once done, you can reinstall both of these side panels in the reverse order that you took them off and pop the front panel back into place. With that done, your PC is successfully assembled, but there is a number of things you need to do until you'll be ready to jump into games. The first thing you need to do is install Windows. I'm not going to go into how to do that in this video, but it's relatively simple and straightforward. I'll have a link to a video on how to do this in the description below. Next thing you need to do is, with the system shut off, hit the power button, then immediately press the delete key repeatedly until you enter into the BIOS. Once in the BIOS, go ahead and enable the XMP profile for the RAM, save changes, and exit. Once this is done, the last thing you need to do is install some drives. You'll need to install motherboard drivers and GPU drivers. All you have to do is download these, extract them, and install them. I'll have links to all the necessary drivers and instructions in the description, so make sure to look there. With this done, you're ready to start playing some games. Hopefully that guide was helpful to some of you who are wanting to build this system. It's now time to go over gaming and streaming benchmarks. Let's start things off with the very popular COD Warzone. I tested this at 1080p with a mix of medium and high settings. With these settings, I saw an average of around 150 FPS. This was a really smooth experience and offered enjoyable gameplay. Next up is Valorant. I tested this game at 1080p, very high settings. At these settings, the system averaged in the mid 200s with very smooth gameplay, and this game is surprisingly fun. If you haven't played it, I would highly recommend checking it out. Next up is Rust, which I tested with these settings on screen. Let me know what settings you play with in the comment section below. At these settings, the system averaged just over 100 FPS. This was a pretty smooth experience, but I'm not very familiar with Rust, so I don't know much about the best settings or expected performance. Moving on to CSGO, I played this at 1080p low settings. This resulted in an average in the low 300s, which again was very smooth. For Rainbow Six, I tested in-game at 1080p high settings. This resulted in an average in the low 200s, which seems to offer a good experience. Let me know if you like Rainbow Six tested in-game better than the built-in benchmark. Finally, I tested Borderlands 3 using the built-in benchmark at 1080p high settings. This resulted in a 121 FPS average, which is great for this demanding of a game. Overall, as you can see, the system's performance is great in gaming. Now let's talk about streaming. I tested the system streaming to Twitch at 1080p 60 FPS with a 6000 kilobits per second bitrate. I streamed both Fortnite and Valorant and found no issues streaming either of those titles. While playing these, I did lock the frame rate to 120 FPS, which keeps things smooth in both game and on the stream. If there are other games you want to see me test streaming in the future, let me know in the comment section below. Overall, for $800, the system provides a lot of performance for the money in gaming and streaming. I hope this video was entertaining or helpful for those of you out there who want to build this PC. These videos are a lot of work, but if you guys keep watching them, then I will keep making them. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.